Good evening and greetings, everyone. Good evening for those of you on the East Coast and good afternoon for those of you on the West Coast. My name is Jay Katz. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Psychedelic Association. Thank you all for joining us today and taking some time to visit with us and to exchange ideas and hear from our esteemed panel. This event is sponsored by Psychedelics Today. We're delighted to partner with them. I want to thank their team, Joe Moore and Victoria Decker. They pulled off an extraordinary event in record time, and there's an awful lot of people interested to hear what we're having to say. Thank our volunteer team as well from the CPA. We are a largely volunteer-powered organization. So James June and Deanna Villarreal, Shida Levi and Matt McKenna, our social media team. James, who is our king of events, is really terrific. And they join hundreds and hundreds of people from across Canada in belonging to the Canadian Psychedelic Association, which exists to awaken a revolution in well-being. Our mission is to educate and advocate to access to all psychedelics as a basic human right. In addition to advocacy, we have a Chamber of Commerce and Business Alliance group. We're involved with other psychedelics organizations around the world, working with the United Nations to ensure consistency of access globally. We are building a community of practitioners and supporters and healthcare givers and teachers across the country who share our beliefs. We have a national resource in white papers and gray papers and research in our library accessible to all. And we also have alliances across the country with other organizations in our sectors, other nonprofits. As a volunteer organization, we have one of our biggest, in that she looms very large, Dr. Pam Crisco, who is a founding volunteer and a founding board member of the Canadian Psychedelic Association, also the moderator for tonight's panel. So Pam, off to you. We're in for a lot of really interesting information from some great, engaged, excited people. Thank you for joining us. I'm as excited as you are to hear what comes next.
Thanks, Jay. We have an amazing panel tonight, and I'm honored to be here with you all today. I am Pam Crisco, and like Jay said, one of the founding board members and a physician on the Canadian Psychedelic Association. So as you come in, please put in the chat where you are from. If you'd like to give a territorial acknowledgement, we'd love that. If you'd like to just say where you're coming from, we'd love that too. Please introduce yourself. Over the last couple of years, the CPA has had some wonderful wins. We had one of the largest federal petitions, garnering close to 15,000 signatures supporting psychedelic medicine. We were one of the supporters of the Nanos poll that published last year, showing 80%, approximately 80% support for psilocybin mushrooms at end of life in Canada. We also presented with others the memorandum of regulatory analysis to Health Canada for psilocybin mushrooms, and we've been working nicely and quietly with Health Canada to help bring forward some really wonderful processes in Canada, along with many, many other groups in Canada. Today, I come to you from the unceded territory of the Klahoose First Nation, and it's my honor to live and work here. But today, let's bring it to our panel, who are absolutely fantastic. So I'd like to introduce you, first off, to Dr. Anne Vallely. She's a PhD and the Director of Psychedelic and Spiritual Studies at the University of Ottawa. Thank you for being here, Anne. Dr. Shannon Daines, RN. She is a founder of the Roots to Thrive program and also the chair of the postgraduate certificate of psychedelic medicine assisted therapy at Vancouver Island University. We also have Dr. Devin Christie, MD, who is a senior lead of psychedelic programs at Numinous and is also an instructor at CIIS and Vital Program, amongst many other programs. And Joe Moore, who is the co-founder and CEO of Psychedelics Today. And Psychedelics Today produced the Vital Psychedelic Training Program. And so I want our panel to let you know a little bit more about themselves and how they came to psychedelics and how they came to psychedelics and teaching and academics and training. So let me hand it over to you, Anne, first, and then we'll go to Devin and then Shannon and on to Joe.
Thank you, Pam. Thanks very much for that introduction. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Anne Vallely, and I'm coming to you from the nation's capital. And I would, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, I would like to acknowledge that the land that we call the city that we call Ottawa is on unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, who have been the guardians of traditions and the guardian of knowledge, including knowledge about healing for millennia. And we're very grateful for that guardianship. I'm not a practitioner, so I'm part of this panel as a religious studies scholar. I'm an anthropologist by training, and I'm in a department of classics and religious studies. And my work is in India, actually amongst a community that has very little interest in psychedelics, but who have a lot of interest in mysticism and non-ordinary states of consciousness. And I became interested in the field of psychedelics because of their practices actually around death and dying. And then comparing the way in which we tend to end our lives in our society is radically different. And I became interested in the research with psychedelics that can be used to alleviate existential anxiety. So that was about 4 or 5 years back. And now, as Pam has mentioned, I'm director of the Psychedelics and Spirituality Studies program at the University of Ottawa. And maybe I'll have an opportunity to tell you more about the program, but I think I'll leave it there. Yeah, thank you, Pam.
Hi, everybody. As Pam mentioned, my name is Devin Christie, and my background is in family medicine and focused practice now in chronic pain and mental health. In addition to being a physician, I'm also a trauma therapist, and I come to this work really through my own deep curiosity in understanding and seeking ways to heal first myself. That's been a lifelong journey from various physical and mental health concerns. And in parallel to that, my deep curiosity and fascination and devotion to trying to find ways to help understand and alleviate suffering. So currently, I find myself working with a company, a publicly traded company in the field, Numinous Wellness. And in there, I am both a clinician and involved in writing programs. So I'm doing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, developed a manual for delivery of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy with our organization, and recently delivered our first internal training in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. And because I've been around in this field for quite a while, initially introduced to it through Dr. Gabor Mate, one of my mentors over 10 years ago. I've sought other opportunities. I learned about the work of MAPS in MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD and got involved in that research. I'm currently a therapist in a Vancouver-based MAPS study and a co-investigator on that trial. And so I come to this from research as well. And I think many of us that have been speaking at conferences and are now involved in teaching are naturally coming from the research arena into clinical practice, as a lot of the best practices that we're working from at this stage are coming out of some of the research that's been done recently and in the past, as well as acknowledging all of the contributions of First Peoples around the world since time immemorial to the understanding of set and setting and context and work with plant medicines. And with that, I also acknowledge that I'm here in what's known as Vancouver, BC, which is the traditional and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And I'm very honored to work and live and play and teach from these lands, these territories. I think I'll probably leave it there. Well, other than that, my interests, my key interests in teaching in this field are around trauma-informed care, somatic principles. I'm a relational somatic therapist, so embodiment-oriented and mindfulness-oriented approaches and how those relate to psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, as well as a strong interest in teaching about the really important and unique ethical considerations for this work. So thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Daines. Thank you, Devin, Pam, and Anne. I come to this work personally, primarily. I came to this work personally. I've been studying and curious about resilience work for a lot of my adult years. Again, for personal reasons, really trying to figure out how to deal with my own personal challenges in working with the biomedical system that didn't seem to have a lot to offer me. So with that, I began down in South America learning a bit about psychedelics and how they work personally, and ended up coming back to Canada and really trying to understand how psychedelic modalities impact our resilience and work with trauma within our system here. So, and had the great opportunity to meet people like the people on this screen that have had similar curiosities. I got into the education field because I teach as a nursing professor at Vancouver Island University, and I also do research through there as well. And through doing work in the fields, through the Roots to Thrive program, where we offer ketamine and psilocybin assisted therapy in a group community of practice setting, there was an obvious need for some standards across Canada, really, and especially even for public credibility in this advanced area, which psychedelics is very different than traditional therapies. So really understanding if we want the public to gain trust in these, we need to create a set of standards that universities can vet, just like we do any other kind of specialties. So that's kind of been where I've been at, is looking at how do we create accredited university-based training that can help advance psychedelics both in the healthcare system and also in the education system. And on that note, I think recognizing that we here in the West are in a very individualized system in the biomedical system, which often actually underscores separation, disconnection, which is often at the very seed of a lot of our mental health challenges. So I think I see Devin nodding her head here too, that this idea of expanding to other ways of knowing, and especially looking here in BC, where I think we're really starting to acknowledge Indigenous ways of knowing, and how that wisdom can really inform how we as Canadians respect what these medicines can do and how to keep safe in that process. And on that note, I'm calling in from the Snuneymuxw First Nation territory here on Vancouver Island, and feeling very grateful. So thank you. I'll pass it along. And I can't remember who I'm passing to. Who's next?
Joe, you're up.
Hi, everybody. Joe Moore, CEO, co-founder of Psychedelics Today. Really excited to be here and be part of this. I'm currently in a place away from home at a psychedelic conference, really interesting one, called Rising Consciousness Community Conference. There it is. It's the RCCCC, and coming at you from Cochiti and Eastern Shoshone lands. Really interesting location, Salt Lake City, if you don't know much of the history. But yeah, I got interested in psychedelics in 2001 when I started reading Stan Groff, and it was extraordinarily earth-shattering for me to see this work in print. I thought I was getting lied to, so I just kept digging. And the work around LSD psychotherapy and Hollichberg breath work are just so interesting to me, and really where my passion lies. So yeah, I started doing Hollichberg breathwork in 2003, probably started psychedelic organizing in Boston in 2007. Don't have the exact date, but I think that's about right. And ran a really interesting event in Boston called Ayahuasca Monologues, where all sorts of folks came out to share their stories. Had some run-ins with ayahuasca and various other substances myself, and I was convinced I was going to be a MAPS trained therapist. It turns out I spent a lot of time in software and instead developed psychedelics today. I'm pretty happy with that so far. We've now got this beautiful training program, Vital, kind of in a lot of ways came out of a lot of our previous work and networks that we've developed. And I think we've trained well over 500 people so far through our other programs, and we're really excited about kicking off Vital, which is just an extraordinary program, very multidisciplinary, and I think one of the finest programs in the space, and it hasn't even started yet. So thank you all for having me be part of this, and I'm really excited to keep this conversation going.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks to all of you for introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit how you got to this field. Now, this is a really wide area of the whole training, education side of it, everything from trip sitting all the way up to PhDs that are gonna be needed and are gonna, present themselves in the future here. So what I'd like you all to take some time to think about, and maybe what we'll do is we'll start with Devin, and we'll go over to Shannon, to Anne, and then back to Joe, is give us a little bit of a rundown of, what you're involved with right now, what level of practitioners are training at that level, and then where do you see it going in the program that you're involved in, or the programs you're involved with? Who do those cater to? So and just to give this, from the questions that are coming in from the audience, are people that have already submitted questions too, is, people are wondering, what do I need? What training do I need? If I want to be a trip sitter, if I want to be a guide, if I want to work in this field, what do I need to know? So Devin, it's a big question.
Yeah.
It's hard to answer. So what I'm going to do is to say, think of the parameters in a few minutes, and and think along the lines of, the where you're teaching already, Devin, and who are those programs catering to, and then we'll hand it over to Shannon, and then Anne, and then Joe.
Yeah, thank you. It is a big question. I think one of the first things to just address and consider is, what is the purpose or the use of psychedelics that we're talking about? Like, what is the context, first of all? Because I want to acknowledge that even though my interest and my focus right now is psychedelic assisted psychotherapy in a healthcare setting, which is coming out of research, which is looking at specific disease entities as enumerated by a diagnostic and statistical manual, it's not the only venue for where psychedelics may be of benefit to humans. There's many, many other contexts for use. So, and I don't have any judgments about other contexts, but so I'm speaking mainly about what I'm involved in, which is in a healthcare setting with vulnerable people who are coming with serious concerns. And right now, because of regulations and certain restrictions, the research that's informing practice with psychedelics in a healthcare setting is primarily looking at individuals with quite severe and often treatment-resistant mental health conditions. So with that population in mind, as likely the people who are most going to have access first in a healthcare setting and through regulated healthcare channels, we need to be really conscious about the qualifications of people who are going to be attending those individuals with those specific vulnerabilities. So the programs that I'm teaching in, which include California Institute, within Numinous, also the Vital program, and others, they have varying, different requirements. I also teach with the Atma Academy here in Canada. Most of the programs are admitting individuals who have some sort of licensing body and are in a healthcare profession. At CIIS, they also accept students from chaplaincy and ministry background. So people that work in a counseling type relationship with people that isn't necessarily informed by a psychopathology model. So there is some spectrum there. At Numinous, our standards currently are master's level registered clinical counselors, psychologists, which is a PhD or doctorate, as well as medical doctors, social workers, registered social workers, and registered nurses, all who have the scope within their profession to engage in counseling psychotherapy. Of course, all of these regulating bodies for various professions have a lot to catch up on and may have differing attitudes towards their practitioners, their licensees engaging in psychedelic assisted therapy. So we need to be aware and conscious of that and actively engaging those organizations and providing them with information about what we're doing. It's very much an interdisciplinary field. So at Numinous, we always have a medical doctor involved in screening and prescription of medications and overseeing all of the medical safety aspects of care, so that that is not part of the scope or requirement of the counseling therapists who are engaging in that aspect of the care. So that's kind of right now in a healthcare setting, the backgrounds of the folks that are coming to it. But I want to also say before I pass it on that, you know, while degrees and letters and licensing credentials are important and I think provide a layer of protection and safety for clients in this work, because there's recourse, you know, if something goes wrong, those governing bodies can receive complaints. There can be actions to practitioners who commit violations or act unethically with folks. And I think that's really important, and that's doesn't exist in the underground at this time that I'm aware of. Letters don't necessarily mean everything about your proficiency in this work. And in my perspective, one's own work in looking at your own psyche, your history, your attachment patterns, what informs your perceptual lens as a human being, what are your biases, do you have a self-inquiry practice, are you in therapy yourself, what is your growth mindset, and are you consciously engaged in that, and coming to this work from that place, having really gone to those depths in yourself, so that hopefully there's less likelihood that you're coming to this work with some unconscious motives about trying to heal everyone else or be a savior or have power over somebody or some other motives that could take people into this work. So personal experience and that kind of awareness and dedication that don't necessarily have anything to do with credentials, I think is also very important. I'll pass it on.
Shannon.
Pam, can you say the sentence or the question simply again, so I don't go on a big rabbit trail?
Talk a little bit about the program at Vancouver Island University. Who's it for, and how people should approach it, and who should apply, and
Thank you.
and then any other training, how people should be thinking about that training based on where they're coming from and their skill sets.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll try not to repeat what Devin said. I very much agree. We at Vancouver Island University, where we've really just been feeling our way through what would it look like to develop something that has a high bar that the public can trust and does not create such a rigid doorway that we are leaving out a lot of the alternative ways of knowing, which is really what helps us keep safe in terms of like mind, body, spirit healing, rather than just protecting physical bodies, which the biomedical system I think is quite adept at. And we really want to expand that lens from being really focused on physical safety to really expanding to spiritual and psychological safety as a whole person kind of therapy, which psychedelics really are. And that is what makes it a little bit different. We are very much conditioned in the West to take, you know, a pill for an ill kind of thing. That kind of thinking does not work for psychedelic medicine. It really requires a lot of trust garnering environment where there's like relational safety, and people really have to feel like somebody's watching their corners, not just from a physical aspect, but also from a spiritual and, dare I say, energetic aspect as well. So at Vancouver Island University, we're really looking at like, how do we create a program that really honors all of the multiple ways of knowing and has a bit of a decolonizing approach to looking at medicine and even honoring like how medicines can be used in ceremony, which they have been for many, many years in other cultures, and how these medicines can even be used from a wellness approach as well, which obviously we are many years away from in the biomedical system, but having an education program that really kind of honors that the entire lens, so that we're preparing a new way of medicine here in Canada, adding to the current mental health toolbox, not taking away from, but adding to. So on that note, we are currently, like Devin had talked about, it's really, really important that people don't look at these training programs as a doorway to train in mental health. There needs to be a floor that they're already coming from. So people already have a specialty And ideally they're under a body that has some accountability. Unfortunately, if we only went by that, we would be limiting the door to biomedical, pretty much lettered biomedical specialists. And so we are looking at ways of honoring spiritual care providers, somatic energy providers as well, working as a team. So as Devin also noted, ideally for the VIU program, we're really promoting this idea of people not working in isolation in psychedelics. I think we can tell even from the media, if you do some quick Google searches, when there's not in isolation, when people are doing things alone and not seeing all their blind spots, it's when we start to see a lot of the human errors in the process. And we are humans that have errors. So, and in this area where we are lowering people's defenses, it's imperative that those human errors are mitigated as best we can. So the team approach allows us to see all the angles, mind, body, spirit angles, and then really working with Indigenous knowledge keepers as well, which is a really big focus of the program, is ensuring that this is a two-eyed seeing approach. We've got the best of Western medicine, the best of Indigenous ways of knowing, and then bringing that together to kind of bring these in a new way in Canada. So yeah, I think I hit all of those.
Thanks, Shannon. On to you, Anne.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was great. And again, I also don't want to sort of repeat what Devin and Shannon have said. Such a difficult question, such a big question, and one that actually I've been wrestling with. And my colleague, Dr. Monica Williams, many of you will know her, we have been wrestling with this question because in many ways our program is kind of throwing that net a little broader. We're a university and we're accepting students into what will be a master's program. So just to give you a sense of where we're at with that, 2 years ago, we created a graduate micro program in psychedelics and spirituality studies. And anybody who had an undergraduate degree was eligible to come into that program. And that's running, that continues to run. So we've been running that for 2 years. But we're hoping to launch a master's program. In fact, we had hoped to launch along with VIU in the fall, but it looks like we won't be doing it 2022. It'll be probably 2023, the fall of 2023, which will be a master's program. And we will have certification. And again, so it raises different kinds of questions. Who's coming into this master's program and for what intention? So we're going to have 3 separate streams. There will be one stream for individuals who are simply interested in the research. They might be coming from backgrounds in religious studies or in anthropology, and will do a master's in psychedelics and consciousness studies with no intention of providing mental health care. They may then go on to do a PhD. But we'll also have the spiritual care stream, and we will hope to have chaplain and clergy coming into that program, as well as having a mental health care stream. And priority, again, for the same reasons, in the interest of safety and minimizing risk, the priority will be given to individuals who have some prior training in mental health care, certainly for that stream. But it's one of the questions that we're debating, whether they need to have it before coming in, or will they come into this master's and then continue to develop those skills. Certainly in the spiritual care stream, we hope to attract clergy and chaplains, but we will probably also have other individuals who will start in this master's program and then continue on to get what are called clinical pastoral education units, for instance, and become chaplains. So this is just one of the questions that we're actually wrestling with. How many who are coming in have to have that prior education, and how many can we accept who will then continue their education afterwards? But it'll have to be made abundantly clear that if one's coming in with a BA in religious studies and one does the 1-year master's program in psychedelics and consciousness studies, they're not equipped then to provide mental health care without continued training. So yeah, our stream has those 3, or rather our program will have those 3 streams of focus: a strong focus on spirituality, but also mental health care and research. Yeah, maybe I'll hand it over to Joe.
Hey, everybody. We started our education journey by trying to make the investigation and query of young people a little bit easier and a lot safer. We were very interested in harm reduction at the beginning. So how do we, people are going to be exploring with this stuff already. We all know that. It doesn't matter what the feds say, we're still going to be consuming these things. And how do we help people understand it a little more, be a little safer? All of a sudden, doctors, therapists, psychologists started showing up, and we said, this really isn't for you. So we started building more. Navigating psychedelics came out of that. And then after hundreds of students have gone through that program, we decided to say, hey, I think we have a really good idea of what a great training program could look like now with all of our experience. So Vital came about, and probably what the biggest differences between all of our programs is that we directly address unlicensed folks and the underground who are all quite active in this space, and they're not going anywhere. And there's probably more underground psychedelic facilitators and explorers out there than there are people with licenses engaged in the space. So how do we kind of level up the people already out there, keep people safer? You know, the less bad stories that come out in the news, the better for everybody. So that means we have to be a little bit more democratic, and that was our decision. So we recruited all the people we thought were amazing in the space that we could handle. You can't email everybody because there's so many amazing people in the space, but really honored for Devin to be part of the program. And yeah, it's just such a cool project because we actually include an experiential component. We'll be traveling to legal countries and or exploring legal options domestically in the US and Canada. You know, legal cannabis all across Canada, extraordinary. You know, great way to, someday I'll join you up there. Not yet though, need a little bit more time here. Yeah, and you know, we have people from extraordinary medical backgrounds to people with tons of experience in the underground coming to be our students. And we're just really excited for that interaction of how do people get to engage with each other there. And I think there's a huge angle here with religious inclusion. So thank you all for considering that. The clinical model is going to be very expensive, and the religious model, especially if religions decide to cooperate and create little nonprofit co-ops, it's a great way to expand access at a very low price point. I'm really excited about those opportunities. Yeah, please, I'm seeing some chats in there. Please do check drugs. Yes. Fentanyl is showing up everywhere, and we have to be really careful. Quick acknowledgement, end the drug war. It is a huge problem, and it's the reason why so many people are dying from fentanyl overdoses. So we need to really be careful out there. And that's a big part of our program, is talking about the drug war. We are exploring if we're going to be able to use our training in Oregon. We don't know yet. Oregon is going to be a really big player in the mushroom space. I think Canada is probably going to be bigger than Oregon. So I'm excited for all of you up there. Anyway, I think that's enough for right now about my program, but Vital Psychedelic Training Program, if you want to check that out. Starts Bicycle Day.
Perfect day to start. Thanks, Joe. And we're going to take us off spotlight, and we're going to put us back onto panel view so you can see everybody all at the same time here. Thank you so much for giving those outlines of your programs. Now, we know many want to move into the space. Many want to work in this space. They're looking at how to design their careers on this or move into this. Many are already working in this area. We know that the need is huge. We have epidemics of mental health challenges, substance use challenges, all sorts of challenges. If you look at the clinical trials coming down the road, you see psychedelics in clinical trials for depression, anxiety, OCD, eating disorders, pain, on and on and on. There's so many more. So the need is great. Many want to do this. How are we going to deal with that? How are we going to deal with that? How are we going to meet that need in a responsible way? Anyone want to jump in there?
I can jump in and just briefly say that, you know, there was the big crackdown on psychedelics, the drug war, you know, the end of all the good research that had started in the earlier part of the last century. And then now we've had this resurgence and renaissance in really exciting findings in research. And it's almost like I've in observing this field for over a decade now, we're kind of almost at this frenzied place where there's so much enthusiasm that it's almost needs to be rebalanced. You know, initially I think that was to balance the heavy stigma and prohibition of these things, but you know, to meet the need, I think we need to really start first by grounding ourselves, acknowledging that you know, there are very, very important considerations with psychedelics in working with people, where people are in very open, very suggestible states. And the vulnerability is up there with like being on an operating table, you know, and you don't just train heart surgeons or neurosurgeons on a weekend. And so while there is such great need and people are dying, and we need to change drug policy first and foremost regarding fentanyl deaths and all of that, we also just need to make sure we're not going too fast as well. So I just wanted to add that point, but I'm sure there's other points other panelists want to make.
Jump in, Shannon.
Okay. Thank you, Devin. That got me going. Yeah, I think something that I often have been thinking about, especially as we've been learning in the Roots program around, and because we're all new to this in the West, right? And I think just really acknowledging that we don't even necessarily know our blind spots yet, and I think we're coming to know them. And how do we do that in a mental health crisis where there are well, almost 80% of the population, even here in Canada, that is having mental health challenges that aren't necessarily receiving the treatment or effective treatment from first-line therapies, and are getting to a point where they are going to an underground to get treatment. So we're in this spot where there's kind of a hurry up and wait, because we don't want to go too fast in the system, and because we are still feeling out our blind spots. And at the same time, if we don't catch up to what's already happening in the underground, we're also not getting at some of the harms that are bound to happen down there. So it's this kind of awkward position where, and I think this kind of team working as teams is actually one of the safest ways we can go forward, because together, I think we actually have a pretty good chance of seeing all of our blind spots. And I also think that, again, this kind of really engaging First Nations, Indigenous ways of knowing and ensuring that they're helping us lead this in Canada is really, really important. So, and maybe just one more note. One thing we've been learning as we've been doing the Roots to Thrive program is really recognizing that like experience is really, really important. So I think sometimes when we have maybe lots of therapy experience, lots of clinical experience, or lots of letters after our name, we think, oh, well, we're ready. Like, well, we're, you know, we just got to, like Devin said, a weekend training on top of my MD or my RN or my RCC or whatever, and I'm good. No, in this area, no. It really, like, it takes a lot of sitting, observing, taking it in, like watching. And the reason I say this is because when your defenses are down and you've got nervy, maybe bordering neurotic, and I'll point to myself, I definitely go there, insecure practitioners holding you, there's energy that comes from that impacts what your experience is going to be. So, and especially if things are getting difficult, emotions are coming up, and you don't have somebody that's got a lot of experience-founded security, you know, and an ability to hold you when you can't hold yourself, you can actually promote more insecurity in our already fairly insecure bodies here in the West, rather than you know, really promoting that secure attachment, which is often like the very root of all of our challenges up here. So that kind of experience and taking it slow and really like getting the experience people need, sitting in these spaces is imperative. So we don't just kind of jump to it with this confidence that we've got it just based on our letters or previous experience.
I'll just echo that. I think that you know, we're hearing from very good sources that we're not going to be able to meet the demand, right, for qualified trained practitioners. So we have that on one hand, and we also have this kind of cultural fascination, right? As Shannon has just mentioned, with the sort of magic bullet that we want the integration and we want it fast, or we want the therapies and we want it quickly. But we need to balance that because there are risks, right? There's profound opportunities here, and I think we've mentioned a number of them already. To enter into a field that holds such remarkable promise for alleviating mental afflictions, but also for attracting diverse practitioners. Like we have a lot of opportunity here for that, sort of changing the medical establishment in many ways, because this is going to be a therapy it's not a one size fits all, right? Many communities are going to sort of develop their own culturally appropriate approaches to psychedelic assisted therapy, and they're going to, as a result, we're going to need diverse populations in providing that kind of training. So that's a tremendous opportunity. If we rush this thing, we might lose that. We've also been talking about the opportunity to move, truth and reconciliation beyond platitudes, right, and beyond just symbolic gestures to actual concrete measures, authentic partnerships with First Nations. This is going to take time. So we have this tension, right? We need to do things well. We need to do it right. We need to bring in diversity, inclusion, First Nations, but we also have a need because we're not going to be able to supply the great need for these therapists. So I don't think there's an easy solution, but I agree with Devin and Shannon that I think, rushing it isn't, it's like a gold rush here, and we're seeing that, right? And a lot of it is actually profit driven. So I think we do need to tread more carefully, I think.
I wanted to
And I'll
echo what
counterpoint that briefly. In
we
that
got three
well
people
over
here.
22 veterans a day in the United States committing suicide, and Theracell in Canada doing incredible work around end-of-life palliative care. So we have to figure out what's the appropriate way to balance Anne's point and the desperate need a lot of people are in. I don't have a great answer. I do think we need to think very carefully about it. That said, it's happening already, and how do we bring that care and caution and attention? Devin?
Oh, just a point to tag on to something that Shannon said regarding just that sitting with and the slowness in developing the skills to sit with. We live in a super hyper rational Western society, and likewise, most of the available mental health treatments come from a very head disconnected from body place, whether that be psychotherapy in the form of talk therapy or cognitive behavioral therapies, where it's not involving the present moment felt experience. But with psychedelics, it's different. Psychedelics open us up, create all these new possible connections where we're in this huge flood of experience that's very visceral and very now. And therefore, the skill sets of practitioners need to meet that. As Shannon was saying, there's co-regulation happening. There's a nervous system talking to a nervous system, and all of the important skills in holding that space that need to be cultivated over time. So anyone that wants to work in this field, start a meditation practice, go to some long meditation sits, start to look at embodiment stuff, dance, movement therapy, and get into your feeling self and get in touch with your nervous system. I think it's crucial.
One of the things I want to add to what you've all said, which is very, very powerful and very important, what you've all said, is that, there is a way that we can bring this full circle, right? Like even though all of us here have credentials, that doesn't mean that we don't actually have personal experience. And this speaks to one of the questions, people coming into this have some personal experience first, or a lot of personal experience, and now it's pulling that full circle. So what I'd like to be looking into the future, how do we pull that? How do we pull eventually we know where this is going. Every university, every college is going to have programming. You are going to train in psychedelic medicine if you're going into psychiatry, quite likely in internal medicine for pain. Nurses are going to be taught clinical. Everybody's this is going to be an option in the future. This is going to be a regulated profession in the future. So how do we pull that? How do we help that transition and pull that full circle that recognizes, decades of maybe underground work, that indigenous work, apprenticeship, mentorship, and recognize that everyone wanting to move into this is moving into it because they want to help. They want to make a change, a positive change. So how do we complete that circle of bringing the underground above ground, having some form of credentialing, but also, and really when we say credentialing, we're thinking of accountability, right? That there's some way to remove danger from that. So that's it's aspirational and inspirational where we are going. How do we do that? How do we move that towards there?
The first step is ending the drug war so people can talk openly. But I guess before we do that, conversations like this need to happen so that people with licenses, people with things to lose, like families, homes, lives, etc., can start talking openly. There's so much experience in the underground, and we need to figure out the right way to come forward about that. And the consequences are so steep right now, especially in the US and Canada. I think it's becoming a little softer, thank goodness. But yeah, the consequences are steep. And how do we create those openings? And it's educating politicians. It's I just joined the lobby, this incredible group, Psychedelic Medicine Coalition in Washington, DC, where we're going to be educating lawmakers. And that's a really important thing to do. Say, hey, like this drug war thing is not okay. Psychedelic thing has a lot of promise. How do we move this forward? So that's my 2 cents. And then we can, go from there, Pam.
I think maybe, I think from the even just current place where we're at right now with the Vancouver Island University program, it's been really tricky because with Roots to Thrive, one of our mandates is to engage in decolonizing practices. And here we are running a colonial training at a colonial university that has like really rigid standards. And it is very difficult to have a foot in both worlds and to try to do this in a good way. And honoring a lot of the experienced practitioners, which some of them maybe aren't the best practitioners in the underground, and others are just fantastic and have had been responsible for a lot of healing there. So and don't necessarily have the letters, right? So I think what's really hard here is that quite likely in Canada and other industrialized nations, what will happen is universities will run the training mechanisms for psychedelic assisted therapies. In a way, it has to happen for public credibility. In order for the greater public to trust what's happening, they are conditioned to trust what's coming through these kind of colonial systems. So we need to work from that place. And how we do it with compassion and recognizing how that impacts those in the underground, I think is yet to be seen. I think we just kind of take it one step at a time and feel our way through it, try and crack the door as best we can, while also honoring the colonial requirements in order to advance the specialty. So that's a windy answer to not an answer, but I think it just kind of speaks to the muddiness of it all.
Yeah, Shannon, I completely agree. There's a big element here of world bridging. And that means, practitioners, folks like all of us on this panel, other leaders in the field, taking the steps, putting our necks out, speaking to the legitimacy of this in spite of draconian ideologies and systems of oppression that are currently running things in our society. I've received anonymous complaints to my college already because I speak publicly about this work. And that's a risk I'm willing to take. I even became a medical doctor because I thought medicine is hurting people. What the heck? Like, how can we get in here and figure out why that's happening and improve it? And so world bridging between Indigenous ways of knowing and reconciliation, but also the underground, the above ground, all of us who have credentials speaking to the legitimacy of what we can learn from the experience of the underground. And I think it takes a lot of courage. So I have so much gratitude and respect for all of you and all my colleagues that are leaders in this field right now, because there's a lot of forces and things to overcome.
I think we're lucky here in Canada, though. We have people here on both sides of the border watching, and in Canada certainly is calmer, more relaxed. I mean, we have grants coming. We just saw the grants announcement coming up for psilocybin assisted therapy from the government of Canada. The CIHR grants coming forward on that sort of stuff. And so I think the doors are opening. And I think something, Joe, you said earlier before, I want to highlight it because it's something I it's one of my mantras too, is it is truly the politicians have to hear. They have to hear that this is what you want. And it's not just the politicians in power, it's the opposition. You have to let politicians on all sides. And that is one of the things we did at the CPA last year, early last year, is we went and met with politicians in every single political party last year and talked to them. And I can tell you that members of every single party were interested in psychedelic medicine. They were not resisting it. So the doors are opening. And so I think what we can do is actually start to shift the conversation about not how do we convince people, but how do we do this well? Again, inspirational, aspirational, let's do it well. I think those doors are opening. I think we really can. I don't think we're having to rage against the machine anymore. Hopefully we'll pull the US kicking and screaming into Canadian policy. But I feel quite positive, and I hear what you're saying, Devin. But I mean, you know, we get to present in front of the health ministry all the time now, and they're listening, and their language is getting better. They're understanding this, and I think we're in a position now that it's not, is this going to happen? It's how is this going to happen? How are we going to do this? And we're going to, and hearing the way you all are speaking, I know we're going to do it really, really well. So, oh, sorry, go ahead, Anne.
No, it's kind of, maybe we've moved away from it. I was just going to, again, kind of echo what everybody else has been saying, but just also to say the obvious, right? That working with non-ordinary states of consciousness is serious business. Like, it's really serious business. And so, you know, it carries an awful lot of responsibility. It can awaken spirituality. It can awaken trauma, all sorts of unresolved stuff. So I think you would ask the question about kind of minimal competencies, right? I mean, how to bring people in. These are really, really difficult questions. And again, these are ones that we're always talking about together. But I do think obviously knowledge about the substances, the various substances that are being used, because they produce different effects. Knowledge about human spirituality, I think that's important. Like, that's a really important part of this. About spiritual emergency as well as about cultural sensitivity to cultural differences. That's hugely important. And codes of ethics and so on, and accountability, and all of these, I think, would be a kind of minimal requirements to, because what we've been describing here with these programs are maybe the gold standard. They're year-long programs. Maybe there's something else that can be shorter, but nevertheless, we need to have, I think, these foundational kinds of approaches. Yeah.
I'd like you all to expand on that a bit. What do you think are the minimum? Like, what is that foundation that somebody needs to have, that people should, because a lot of people are watching, they want to know what to do. If you want to be a good therapist, you clearly want to be competent, you want to fill up your toolbox. What are those things? Let's give some ideas. Go ahead, Shannon.
Just something to consider, I think, as we've been feeling our way through this with the Roots to Thrive program, is that for people to come on board, they usually actually come through, we usually recruit from the patient population, actually, because the lived experience of being with psychedelics is a really important part of having a felt sense of how it works in non-ordinary states of consciousness, and having some of that security. So I think that's a big piece. I think there's we don't necessarily have to take a chemical in order to have a non-ordinary experience. So I think that door can be wider. The other piece too is just how we do it in the Roots program is then people go through a mentorship period of time, which is at least 3 months, where they are considered a mentee, where they don't have a role. They're not necessarily there to secure things. They are there to learn. And it's also a bit of a long interview period as well, so that, and a lot of the work with Roots to Thrive is very personal focused. So those of us that hold space are called patient partners, meaning we come to this work personally and professionally. There is no, I'm going to put my professional hat on now and leave my personal self at the door. That doesn't work with psychedelics. You bring your whole person into this work. So I think there's like a vetting period where it's not about, you cannot look at a piece of paper in order to tell if somebody is going to be good at this work. It is a relational process, and it's a relational vetting process as well. And it just, as Devin was kind of saying in the beginning, one of the most important factors are we doing our personal work? And it's not about whether we have mental health labels or not. In fact, that doesn't really matter at all, in my opinion. I think it's about how authentic we are, how willing we are to dig into our own neuro or atypical neuropathies and whatnot, and that we bring our whole self in a space of awareness and consciousness to this work. So all that long way of saying that I don't think it's about completing assignments and having a really lovely CV. I do think we need to create a bit of a bar there, but there's a lot of personal vetting that needs to happen, which I think will happen through practicums, supervised type practice. And then that's how we can kind of sign people off in terms of being kind of psychologically safe to go into this space.
I think the model Stan Groff came up with is really killer for this, because it's at the very bare minimum a 2-year training program to certify in that breathwork methodology, and there's no drugs involved. And there's Shannon, as you were kind of suggesting, it's, pass an exam and you're good to go, right? You actually have to show competency, and the people need to be able to trust you at the top of that organization. And I think that's probably the gold standard that I would shoot for. So, I'm thinking it's more like a 3 to 4 year program. Like I'm happy we were able to pull off a 12-month program here, Psychedelics Today, but this, it's not really adequate. And what you can cover in 12 months is not adequate to make really amazing people super duper functional in this space. And Devin, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I know we're near the top of the hour. I put a few things in the chat there, but I would agree, another model of training that I think bears some relevance is, my certification to become a mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher through UCSD. It was a 2-year program. I had to facilitate a minimum of 10 8-week cycles of the program with videotaped supervision, all these supervision hours, because actually holding people in guided meditations is actually guiding them into altered states of consciousness as well, which comes with very similar responsibilities as guiding people in very profound, potentially profound states that can happen fast with psychedelics. So I agree with what you're saying.
And if we compare it to some of the indigenous models, those are cakewalks, right? I mean, a lot of the apprenticeship models are 5, 10, 15
years.
Yeah.
Years.
The clinical pastoral education for so psychedelic assisted spiritual care, the CPE units are about 400 hours of practicum. So that's, again, an interesting model. The experiential component would be quite extensive for students, for instance, in our program who are going through that spiritual care. But then there's also just the institutions. I think I was talking to somebody on this call earlier that the universities today they don't want to create master's programs that would be more than 1 year. So in fact, we were originally thinking that our master's in psychedelics and consciousness studies would be a 2-year program. But the ministry and the universities want to have these just 1 year. So there's those kind of constraints as well in doing it through the university. So.
Would you all mind taking a stab at how are we going to deal with access, price points, diversity, getting into these programs?
Community. In the United States, we have a different relationship to universities, and they're kind of collapsing in a lot of ways. So we have to be really cautious and mindful of the projections of what's going to happen in universities. So how do we make things cheaper? How do we make things really accessible? And I think when we're designing a lot of these programs, we need to be explicitly mindful of how expensive is it to become one of these people. It's not cheap to be a doctor. I'm sure some of you know that, and it's not an easy prospect to become an amazing facilitator either. Like, where can you really train if you're not inside one of these special pharma groups? It's really hard. So community approaches are going to be really big in my mind. I think there's going to be a lot of stuff happening outside the framework of hospitals and clinical mental health. I would like to see something like psychoanalysis is in certain parts of Europe, where it's just everywhere. This is just kind of ubiquitous, and part of just what we do as humans is connect with spirit and plants and ourselves. And psychedelics can really help, other drugs too, but we have to be really inclusive and careful and listen to others. I've been learning a ton from the decrim world. I don't always agree with their arguments, but I do appreciate their work and efforts to be really inclusive here.
Also, scholarships and support for people coming from racialized and marginalized backgrounds, because let's face it, they're underrepresented in medicine and psychology and in specifically this field of psychedelics. And marginalized and racialized communities bear the brunt, such a burden of the actual mental illness and physical illness that we're talking about here. So I think that's an important consideration too for access for therapists, is the importance of scholarships and opening the doors and making the bar a lot lower price-wise for people representing those communities.
That's just again to echo, that's what we're planning, right? We're planning a sort of concrete efforts to include people of color, marginalized communities, and then have hopefully very good scholarships to bring them in. I mean, I think you've alluded to this, just the barriers to that, right? The barriers are a legacy of fear and distrust of the medical establishment, means those efforts are going to have to be doubled down. For very good historical reasons. And so we have to make, and again, if my colleague Monica Williams were here, this is what she would be talking about right from the beginning, because that's her main focus actually, is ensuring that, marginalized communities become therapists, right? So that they're role models as well within this new paradigm. So scholarships is the way we're going. That's the way we're thinking, yeah.
And maybe on that note, if I can add to that, this is the same problem in the treatment space as well. And even looking at special access, it's kind of a who you know, in terms of is a provider willing to put in a lot of volunteer hours to get your application off to Health Canada? Do you know somebody that can do that for you? And in the education system as well, even the scholarship process it's going to require funding. And the system is currently not really engaging in funding on the treatment side or the education side. And I think if we are in a socialized system and a socialized education system and healthcare system, if we really want to get real about this and not have it just be more of the same, we need the system to step in and take a role here to really kind of help level the playing field. And it's not just about doing the right thing. It's about bringing these medicines forward in the right way, which will serve us all, because a lot of these other populations that are not, really attached to the colonial system are exactly what we need to bring these forward in a good way. So it's really for the benefit of all. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Would you all mind speaking a little bit to the costs? What are the costs of these programs?
Oh, I don't know actually, Pam, what ours is going to cost. I think at the University of Ottawa, it would be about $10,000, but we may not go that model. That would be completely funded by the ministry. If we go a kind of hybrid model, partly private, partly funded by the ministry, it would go up maybe $3,000 or $4,000. So it could be for the year-long program, $13,000 to $15,000. But then we have more flexibility, and I'm not really sure why, but that's what I've been hearing. We'd have more flexibility in terms of the numbers of students we could admit and so on, and we could also create these scholarships. So we're still discussing this. I think Shannon might be able to address it more directly because they're just that much ahead of us, right?
So VIU is in the ballpark of it's about $7,000 for the year, and then we're also discussing partnering up with MAPS so that it's a dual certificate program, which is looking pretty likely, which will add a bit of an expense to that. So for the whole year, for kind of a dual certificate, it's probably going to be in the neighborhood of around 8,000, give or take, and that is really based on kind of basic per credit course, and it is a graduate course, so it's pretty typical. And at this point, we don't really have any scholarships going because that requires kind of private funders essentially, or the system to kind of step in and scholarship.
I will just speak at Numinous with our internal practitioner training. Practitioners who are working with us, we cover training costs with our internal training programs, which, you know, we've developed with pretty robust lens, knowing that there aren't regulations and standards developed externally yet, although there are a number of wonderful programs in development. So we will be offering some limited trainings externally, but internally, trainings that involve also practical hands-on work, and we're working towards experiential training with medicines will be covered for practitioners working with us. And if anyone is interested in talking to us more about those opportunities, I can post a contact info in the chat.
And Devin, is your program an online program outside of the practicum?
Yeah, well, yes, because it's been developed in the era of COVID-19 global pandemic. So we have, you know, the training we just delivered for CAP was 20 hours online with additional hours of background reading and preparation. And in the online format, it wasn't didactic. It was very much a lot of breakout groups, a lot of experiential practices. And then now that things are opening up, we'll be moving to having in-person trainings that that complement the online materials and give more space for practice, role play, also experience with medicines, so that all of that is there. And then, of course, that will be rolled into an ongoing peer and expert supervision model over time.
I think it sounds like
Great.
our program, the one that we have and that Shannon has. So most of the course is online, but the field work and the practicum, of course, would be
Yeah, and we really want to work with, I know we've spoken with you, Shannon, about potentially being practicum sites, you know, with having clinics that have the standards to deliver these therapies, practicum sites for folks coming from all manner of training, so that we can really work together to increase the opportunities for people to gain these competencies.
Now, there's been a lot of great questions. A lot of them don't have anything to do with this, but they're still great questions. So we're taking them down and we'll make sure they go into other webinars. You know, there's a lot to do here. What's the future here? Like, where are we going here? What do you guys see? Okay, how about your wish? Let's make it easier. In 5 years from today, when we're all back celebrating how far we have come, what does it look like? What does the training look like in the US and in Canada?
I hope everybody's growing mushrooms. Start there. And people know how to use them safely. And I think there will be radical inclusion far greater than we can hope for in 5 years. I totally believe that 5 years is a long time out, and we have a lot of work to do, and people keep joining the party. So I think the needle is going to be moved dramatically. I believe there's going to be at least 5 big insurance companies helping cover a lot of these massive treatments, like the MAPS protocol, for instance. So it's going to be really killer. And I just met some people here at this conference who are close to convincing Medicare in the United States to cover ketamine for mental health diagnosis, which is good for everybody. So a lot of really great progress, and I'm very optimistic what it looks like 5 years out. A lot of problems in the meantime, Devin.
Yeah, I just really want to see a paradigm shift happening such that our dominant institutions are actually working to incorporate a more holistic approach that isn't a disease-based model, but in fact is integrating the sound science and also wisdom of Indigenous peoples around the mind-body connection, that that actually isn't disconnected, and that these approaches where we're combining psychedelics with psychotherapy are working to actually heal the roots of what is driving what we call in medical terms, or, you know, the psychopathology, but really people not thriving. And so to reduce suffering, to help people increase happiness, and whatever their definition is of that, requires that our systems stop palliating downstream effects of things like early childhood adversity and social disconnection, as Shannon was saying at the beginning. And we really start to work together for a new paradigm that really looks at all of the social determinants of health and then provides treatments that help people access themselves, feel empowered in themselves, not dependent on experts outside themselves anymore like it currently is. And that's really what I hope to see, and that is actually being taught in all of our institutions and not just on the fringes. I share your hope too, Joe.
I guess I'll I'll echo that as well. It's just amazing how we're just echoing each other. But I'm thinking about Houston Smith, who wrote an article in 1970. So Houston Smith was a great comparative religionist, and he kind of popularized the study of religion. And he was also very supportive of psychedelic study. This is in the first wave. But he wrote an article in 1970 where he warned about he feared that there wouldn't be a really profound impact of psychedelics for the society or for the individual. And his reasoning was, he said it was the Western models of the mind, a kind of anti-spirituality bias. Because Houston Smith was arguing that the most important condition for some sort of carryover for these experiences to be integrated and to be meaningful is some kind of conviction of their truth, a conviction of their veracity was the language that he used. But we live in a culture that is not necessarily supportive of these ideas. So much of the therapy is geared to have very powerful, profound spiritual experiences, but so that they alleviate some mental health condition, which is wonderful. But the spiritual experience is used kind of instrumentally, right? And people are having spiritual awakenings, atheists, avowed atheists, or meeting God, this kind of language. But that's been sort of side shifted. That's not that important necessarily in the medical model, right? That's interested in the sort of curative effect. And so I think that's a problem. I think it's an interesting and an important warning. And so I would share with you that hope for a kind of new paradigm. We were talking a moment ago about two-eyed seeing, and it reminds me also of the third eye that we hear a lot about in Eastern traditions, the wisdom eye, the invisible eye. The eye that sees the inner knowledge, right? Rather than just knowledge from without, but also knowledge from within. And we need that kind of epistemological humility, right? To recognize that there are different ways of knowing, not just about the material world, but also that there's knowledge that can come from within. So that's a radical shift if we can have that. But that would be my hope.
I'll just say quickly, so I'm not repeating, totally agree with everything here. And just that psychedelics just aren't so sexy in 5 years. They're like as boring as like dentistry. And I'm sorry for any dental hygienists or dentists in the room, or engineering, or like, this is just something that we do. And it's not so contentious. We certainly don't have a war on drugs. We have normalized and accepted mental health conditions and neurotypical and non-neurotypical types as all a part of the colorful spectrum of us as humans. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks all. So a couple of things here I just want to let everybody know. There's a lot of great questions there. A lot of them had to do with specifics around therapy, which is not really what we're focusing on this time. We really want to focus on the programs and where they're going and what these programs are teaching and learning. On the website, I'm just putting in the chat right now, on the CPA website, there is a list of all the programs that we know of, including all the ones that Devin is listed, Joe is listed, Anne is listed, Shannon is listed. If there's any missing, we put them there as a resource. So you can see it is a buyer beware though, like we don't endorse, we just put them there for you. I'd really like to do this again soon. And my hope is that what we see is that every community college has this, every university has this, that is completely accessible, and that there's people right now watching that are probably at the beginning of their academic careers, and that they can actually go through it and, prepare themselves with a strong foundation and then add psychedelic as a tool in that toolbox. We will make sure that all the programs and all the speakers' contacts are listed in the show notes when the webinar goes live on the website. So watch for that. We've been trying to put in all the websites and links in here in the notes for you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Psychedelics Today, for sponsoring this and making this possible. We really appreciate that. Thank you to all the CPA supporters. We are a membership supported organization, so we love it if you buy a membership and support it. It's a 99% volunteer organization, and we have amazing volunteers that really show up open-hearted and really care about moving this forward. And all together as a community, we will do that. And that is what we are doing. And the fact that we're even talking about this so wonderfully with all these professionals and all you wonderful people in the audience means we are making a difference and we are moving forward and we're not stopping. We're going to continue. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, wonderful people. Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Joe. Thanks, James in the background, and JRED. And I wish you all just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
And thank you, Pam.
Thank you
Well
so
done.
much, Pam. You know, that really for all your leadership and work and for hosting so beautifully.
It's a team. It's all of us all together. We couldn't do it without each other, right? Honored to be here with you guys. Thank you everyone so much for joining. We'll get all those information. We'll make sure these guys get all the information to us. Thank you, thank you, thank you.